All right, so we are live, everyone. My name is Jesse Hildebrand, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And of course, there are no classrooms right now. All of you are joining at home on YouTube, and we really appreciate you tuning in as we continue to bring scientists, explorers, and amazing facilities to you from around the globe. So today, we are continuing our epic SciComm Storytime series. So every day at 2 p.m. Eastern or 11 Pacific, we're being joined by a rock star in science communication. And so we are kicking off our second week with Dr. Samantha Yammine. So she is a neuroscientist, a science communicator, a digital media producer. You will know her as Science Sam on Instagram, and her work in covering a whole range of amazing topics, right now highlighting the COVID-19 outbreak, of course, has got her featured on Netflix, on AsapSCIENCE, on TVO, CBC, and so many more media outlets. She is top of her game. We are so thrilled to have her with us today. And so without further ado, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Yammine, and take it away.
Thanks for having me here. Hi, everyone. My name's Samantha. You can call me Sam. And if you're going to talk about me, please use the pronouns she and her. And of course, say good things. I'm very easy to find on the internet. And here you can see all the places you can find me and keep chatting with me beyond this really fun interaction we're about to have. Today, I want to focus on one of my favorite things, which is your mind-blowing brain. You can see on my front slide, it says that I have a PhD, and so some people will call me doctor, but I'm here not working on the front lines in any hospitals. So that means that I'm the type of doctor that's not seeing patients and working in healthcare facilities, but I'm the type of doctor who's had a lot of school. So here is me at my high school graduation. You can do the math yourself to figure out how old I am. Here's me again at another graduation, getting my undergraduate Bachelor of Science from the University of Toronto. There I studied the brain, and I also studied cell biology. So I have that kind of microscopic view of the brain. And then this was just last year, getting my PhD, and that's where I got the fun doctor title. But really it means that I did a bunch of research trying to figure out really exciting questions about the brain. And that took me quite a bit of time, as you can see the years jumping. So I want to share with you the reason why I went through this really long journey of getting these degrees and doing a PhD. Really the exciting thing about these degrees isn't that you have the letters after your name, it's what you get to learn along the way. And my learning journey really started with a moment like this. I was in a university class at the University of Toronto, and it was a neuroanatomy lab course, which means that we were trying to learn about the structures within this really bumpy looking organ you see in these hands, which is the brain. The same brain that's inside your heads looks exactly more or less like this, a little bloodier in our heads. This one's been cleaned out. I was standing there in this class, the smell of formaldehyde, which is not a really pleasant smell. Hopefully you've never had to smell it. Standing in this class, and suddenly the teacher hands me a brain. And so this is exactly what I look like, holding a brain. She's like, "Can you hold this for a sec?" And I was like, okay, sure. And then she started explaining something I should have been paying attention to. But instead, all I was paying attention to was the fact that in my two hands, I was holding this soft structure that was at one point someone's entire being. Everything they've ever done, thought, felt, any memory they've ever had, any emotion, anything was all inside this little structure that I was holding in my hands. And today, I don't have a real brain, but I do have this little model brain. This one's hard and plastic, but the brain inside your head is soft and squishy. And from that moment and the many years of schooling that followed afterwards, I've been completely captivated with the brain. And today I want to tell you a little bit about what has caught my curiosity, because I think you'll find that the brain inside of your skull is mind-blowing. So let's talk about it. This is the brain. This is a fun artistic rendition of the brain. This picture of the brain is facing to the right, so facing this way. Let's see if I can get a little pointer over here. No, let me try again.
Yep.
Okay, I did it. All right, so this is the front part of the brain. This is the back. And over here is the part of the brain that extends down into your neck and all the way down your spinal cord. This fascinating thing that holds everything about us is just a mere 17 centimeters long, or 6.7 inches across, and it only weighs about 3.3 pounds. So it's pretty light. And yet it takes up about a quarter of our daily caloric intake. It's very, very greedy. It takes up a lot of our energy. All the food that you eat, a lot of it goes towards sustaining this relatively small structure inside your head. So if you wrap your fingers around your head with me like this, you're kind of giving your brain a little bit of a hug. You can hug it like this too. Now, inside that brain, it's not just one lumpy thing like this. It is made of many, many smaller things called cells. And these are so small that you can only really see them with a microscope. And I'll show you some pictures through a microscope in a second. But what fascinated me was that in this structure that looks like one big thing, it's actually made of many, many, many different types of cells. So I'm going to pause for a second for you to think, okay, my brain is about this big. How many microscopic cells do you think it holds? Take a second to make a guess. Maybe if there's someone near you, you can yell at them and see who has a closer answer. All right. The answer is 171 billion cells, 171 billion. Now that might sound like a big number. Maybe you guessed a bigger number, maybe you didn't. 171 billion is huge. That's how many microscopic cells you have making up your brain. In fact, that's such a big number. That's more cells in your brain than there are seconds in 5,000 years. So if we spent 5,000 years counting one number per second, we would finally reach or get close to reaching the number of cells in the brain. That's so many small things, many microscopic cells in our brain, more cells than there are seconds in 5,000 years. That's more cells in the brain than seconds that I've been alive, which is a pretty long time. Now, the cool thing is that there aren't just so many cells in your brain. There are many different types, hundreds or thousands, depending how you categorize them. There are so many different types of cells in your brain. And these are just some of my favorite types of cells that you have. So you can see the ones up here in the top left. These are a funky type of cell called Purkinje cells. And if you rest your hands on the back of your head like you're relaxing, maybe you're about to take a nap or daydreaming, you're touching the part of your brain, the cerebellum in the back of your brain, where those cells like to hang out. I'll show you on my model brain. If we flip the brain upside down and look underneath, this little bumpy structure is where the Purkinje cells hang out. Now, these three different cell types you can see, these are pictures of cells that I took myself through a microscope in my lab during my PhD. And so these I actually grew in a dish, these different brain cells. I grew them in a dish myself and then took pictures. And the fun colors you're seeing are ways that scientists help to see cells better. The cells in our brain don't actually glow all of these fun colors, but there's a lot of artistry to science, and adding these colors lets us see different features that might be really hard to distinguish otherwise. So you can see even in the top left, we have all the cells colored different colors. That's really helpful. Otherwise, we might miss all of the different overlapping branches from each of these different cells. The green cell's one, the purple's another, the blue cell's another cell. And if you didn't have those different colors, you wouldn't know that there's overlapping kind of branches there. We would have missed that detail. So there's a lot of art behind science, and that art helps us to really appreciate the complexity of cells in our brain. Now, the great thing is that these cells don't just exist on their own, they're actually sending messages to one another. And that's one of the key ways that our brain works. Anything that you're doing, even you just sitting here quietly, sitting upright in your chair, many cells in your brain are firing messages to help you to stay steady so you don't fall over or to the side. You need all those cells in your brain working together and firing these messages to keep things going. And they send these messages at super fast speeds, up to 434 kilometers an hour, or if you're using a different system, 270 miles per hour. That's way faster than I ever want you to go in a car, and more than 2 times as fast as you might ever go in a car. Super fast. And that's how our brain cells, all of these billions of brain cells and all these different types of cells can work together to let us do everything that we do every single day. Now, the amazing thing is that there's billions of cells, but trillions of connections between them. So if you're in a room with a TV, or maybe you have your internet router in the same room, take a second now to have a peek behind it. You might notice behind your TV, or even just right now, I have all of these wires and cables connecting my computer and the webcam and all this stuff in the room. It looks pretty complicated. In fact, you can often, you're trying to find the right plug for your phone and you can't find it. Lots of wires everywhere. Now in your brain, it's like the back of your TV or the back of your computer times a trillion. there are trillions of connections between all of these billions of cells in your brain. So this structure is actually made of lots of microscopic cells and even smaller and finer and more connections between all of them. It's this web of things working together, firing messages to one another. That's really what our brain is. And that's really what we are, because that's how it can control everything that we do. So I've been a little abstract. Let's get into some nitty-gritty. Let's see this in action. Here's what we're going to do. On the count of 3, if you're able to, you're going to clap with me. Okay? 1, 2, 3, clap. Oh, there's a little bit of a delay, so we couldn't all clap at the same time. But you got the idea. I said 1, 2, 3, clap. We did it. What really happened in the milliseconds between me saying 3 and you clapping? Well, you were listening, or perhaps let's say you could have been reading the text on the screen of what I'm saying, but let's say you were listening for my auditory cue, the sound cue of me saying 3, clap. Okay, so you listened. All of these funky little cells in your ear, including these cells that have little hairs, and when noise comes in, the noise causes those hairs to sway. All of these funky little cells in our ear fired excitedly. They sent a message to the side of our brain. So if you kind of just hold the side of your head here, this is where the cells in your ear send messages to the temporal lobe in the side of your brain, highlighted in blue on this brain picture. They sent a message here. Then those guys said, it's a cue for us to move. So it fired a message now to the top of our brain, to a special part of our brain right here called the motor cortex. In fact, if you wear a headband, right around where you might place that headband, that's where the motor cortex is. The part of your brain for movement is just right around there. Well, I'll keep the headband on, why not? So this is representing my motor cortex. Also happens to be this kind of orangey mustard color on my slide. I did not plan that coordination, but it worked out. So here we have cells from the ear going to the side of our brains, saying it's a message for movement. Tell the movement part of our brain to activate. And it says, okay, sending that message for movement down from the brain, down through the spinal cord. Now we're sending it to the muscles in the arm so that they can come together and clap. All of this, ear, temporal lobe, motor cortex, down the spinal cord, muscles, all of that went into the simple thing of me saying clap within milliseconds. And that's the beauty of our brains, is that they're doing all of these things subconsciously without us noticing, just for us to do really small tasks that we might take for granted in our everyday lives. Now, I think this is really cool. And I spent years trying to understand even the simplest thing, like, okay, seeing something or breathing or sitting up. All of these small tasks take so much effort and so many thousands of cells working together at a given time. This whole myth of only using 10% of your brain is simply not true. Our brain is always working all the time to do even the easiest of things. Never mind when we're studying and learning in school and doing really complex tasks. That's all these other sections of our brain going wild too. So these questions were all fascinating to me. But the one thing that I got stuck on, the one thing I was just like, I need to know the answer to this, is great. We have all these cells that let us do all these different things. Where did they come from? How do you get this complex branchy looking cell that I showed you earlier? How does that ever come to exist? Really early on, before we were even born, we were just these really boring round cells. And how do you go from a boring round? You might see in your biology textbooks, when you see the picture of a cell, it's always round. So how do you go from that kind of early kind of round cell to this complicated tree branchy cell? How do you get these really specialized cells, one that's for movement, one that's for listening, one with weird hairs in the ear? How does that come to be? And that was the question of my PhD. This big book back here, that's my thesis. It's almost 200 pages. And that was an attempt for me to answer a small part of this question. How do cells form before we're even born? And so that took a lot of work of me working in a lab. I didn't usually, pour colorful liquids. Lab work is a lot more bending, craning your neck over a microscope, trying to understand, look at these little cells and figure out things about them. But for the sake of this photo, I was pouring colorful liquids. And sometimes we use colorful liquids. But the real thing, the thing that I want everyone to appreciate is even answering a simple question like, where does a cell come from before we're born, would take many people like me answering different parts of that question, studying for years in a lab just to find out one small piece of the big puzzle of how our brains come to be, how our miraculous brains, billions of cells and trillions of connections that let us do everything, form before we're born and continue to develop throughout our lives and mature and grow and change and let us experience a lot of the wonderful things of this world, including some of the scary things in this world, like what we're feeling right now. All of those anxiety feelings and everything, all are very real things, real feelings coming from different parts of our brain. And so even in the most difficult of times, our bodies and our brains in particular are working so hard, even to do the simplest thing. If you got out of bed today, that was an extraordinary feat of neuroscience, extraordinary feat of your brain helping you to get out of bed and do whatever that you choose to do today. And so no matter what you feel about your body, about the world, about your current situation, take a moment of gratitude to thank your mind-blowing brain. So let's have a little chat now. Any questions you might have, any thoughts, you can ask me here now or anytime in the future.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Sam. And what a neat topic. We've never actually covered brains in the history of exploring by the seat of your pants. So this is a great first dive in. Yeah, I love the figure. That's fantastic. So for anyone tuning in on YouTube, you guys can type in questions in the chat bar on the right. Just let me know where you're joining from, and I'll pass along as many questions to Sam as I can. Sam, if you want to come out of screen share so we can see you again, that would be awesome.
Cool.
And I'll kick us off by asking, so what did you find in your thesis? Is this something that could be explained to kids readily enough, or too complicated for today's conversation?
Oh, it can always be explained. Sorry, I'm just, what's difficult to do is to stop the screen share.
Pop your big red button.
Okay. It's because I have the laser pointer on. There we go. I will figure it out. I will.
No worries. Take your time.
Okay, there we go. Stop share. We did it.
You're here.
Yeah. So I can explain. My PhD, what took me 6.5 years, was I was trying to answer this question of where do the cells of our brains come from. We talked about that, and the way that I tried to answer that was, if you can think of your family tree, you might think of your grandparents and then your parents and then you and your any siblings you might have and then any kids you might have coming next, and you can build a little family lineage or family tree. I was trying to do that, but for the cells of the brain. And so eventually I was able to kind of piece together a little family tree of brain cells. And the really exciting finding is that each of these different types of brain cells we have kind of has its own branch point. In some cases they overlap, and some cases, you could see like, okay, if I have a cousin, we kind of came from the same branch. But in other cases, brain cells that are really different got their own separate branches. And trying to fill in just how many branches there are to make those billions of different cells, that was really what my thesis was about and what I found.
Super cool. Thank you so much. All right. Easy question for you from Isla in Guelph, and welcome to Miss Furnival's Kids again. You guys have been tuning in all week long. How big is your brain?
How big?
Yeah.
Good question. So it weighs about 3.3 pounds and is about 17 centimeters across. So if you kind of just feel your head right now, you have a centimeter or two of skull. I don't know. So you got a bit of skull. It's definitely thicker here and less thick in certain parts. And then you have some like blood vessels. You have a web of blood vessels, and the brain's actually not stuck to anything. It's just connected through this like meshy web, which is really kind of scary. It's just like floating around. It's not connected to the skull in any way. It's just connected via webs. So if you think about a few centimeters of skull and then a bit of web, and then that's about how big your brain is. Just the size, minus that, and that's the size of your head, and that's how big it is. 17 centimeters on average.
And then how much does it weigh, just in case that was the question?
Oh yeah, 3.3 pounds or 1,500 grams.
Cool. Is that like an average? Like, do people's brains get way bigger than that, or is that?
Yeah, I don't know what the margins are on that. So that's an average brain. Now you can think, a baby kind of has a small head, and so their brains will still keep growing. And so you can kind of even just compare like a baby. I have a niece, and so her head's probably about this big compared to mine. Hers has some room to still grow, and so it'll get bigger. So hers would be a little bit smaller. But that's the funny thing is humans are very interesting. We kind of had a trade-off between growing our brains to their fullest size and having these really big brains, but then that would be really difficult for them to be delivered, right? So you'd have to have like a really large birth canal, and then that wasn't really, the human body would have to be designed totally different for that. And so there was kind of a trade-off where they decided, okay, why don't we not finish cooking the brain? Why don't we get a full, not all the way cooked, keep it a little small still, then the baby's born, and then it continues developing afterwards. And humans just had to evolve social relationships where it's like, okay, this baby isn't ready to survive on its own. I'll just take care of it for a while it finishes developing.
Very cool. Thank you so much. All right. Rabia in Rockwood, Ontario, and so many people in Rockwood tuning in the last couple of weeks. So nice to have you here. What are some of the things that you can do to keep your brain healthy? Is it like exercising your body?
Yes, that's a great question. You'll see a lot of people trying to sell you this and that for your brain. It's a very hot topic. Everyone wants to sell you something to keep your brain healthy. There's not a lot of research on what exactly will keep the brain healthy. In general, the brain is so greedy, it takes what it needs. So it's kind of taking care of itself already. There are a few small things that you can do to help it in its daily processes. And that's, sleeping well, exercising, and, eating a balanced diet, whatever is good for your mental state. If right now you're really stressed and you need a few extra slices of chocolate cake, that's fine. But eating a pretty balanced diet, it's pretty boring. I know everyone wishes there was a magic pill for an amazing brain, but our brains are already amazing. They just need you to keep doing the basic things that you've always been told, and they'll stay pretty happy.
Fantastic. All right.
Exercise
Diana,
is really good.
yeah. Is there any specific kind of exercise? Just out of curiosity with that. It's interesting.
I don't know. There's even dance has been shown to be really good for the brain. Like it's for the heart. It's good to get your heart rate up, but for the brain, it seems to be pretty happy with a mixture of different exercise. So exercising is honestly really good for a lot of things.
Fantastic. All right. Diana Alcindi, she's doing a talk with us on Friday for SciComm Storytime. So you SciComm Storytime, you are always in each other's talks, and I love the support. So she wants to ask, what inspired you to start science communication?
Well, I think, as you can probably tell, I'm just always bubbling with enthusiasm with not all the time, but when it comes to the brain and topics I find scientifically cool, I am just like bursting all the time to want to share it. And I grew up in a family that had no scientists in it. We had people who used science. We had lots of farmers in my family and lots of clever people in my family, but no one who had studied science. And so in order for me to be able to relate to them and tell them what I'm doing every day, I had to learn how to communicate it in a way that would be exciting to someone who hasn't taken the courses I have. And so that kind of practice of communicating science was a necessity in order to communicate to my family members. And so that's a nice thing about having friends and family with different interests. You'll develop really great communication skills. I found out I really liked talking about science, and I liked inspiring other people to appreciate science. I'm also really passionate about empowering people with information so that they don't get tricked into spending money on things that might not only be ineffective but potentially dangerous.
Yeah. And again, I stressed this at the beginning of the talk, but if you guys who are tuning in on YouTube haven't seen Sam's amazing Instagram posts, YouTube work, and more on COVID and on general topics, you really should check that out. It's fantastic, and lives up to everything you just said. Quick follow-up on this. So again, you're a kid, you're excited, you love sharing the science communication with your family. Shelby in West Virginia wants to know, was there something that took you from neuro to science communication? How did you go from this topic that's your main focus to talking about everything?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of neuroscientists, you can be a neuroscientist and study, it's a very multidisciplinary field. There's lots of different ways to be a neuroscientist. You can be a computer scientist who studies the brain. You can be a cell biologist. You could be putting people in scanners and looking at that. A behavioral neuroscientist studying human behaviors. Anyways, lots of different types of neuroscientists and lots of different ways to be a neuroscientist. But the thing we all kind of have in common, the reason you're drawn to the brain instead of the heart or the lungs or the pancreas, is because you're interested in humans and you're interested in people. And you're just become fascinated in understanding, what is it about people? And what you learn is that, despite some of the nasty sides of people, we are amazing beings and we all share this beautiful brain. And that's just something like art. When you see it and you start experiencing that, you want to share it because it's just a really cool fundamental thing about all of us, and many animals with brains too. It's just wonderful the things that we can do, and you get excited about sharing it. And because the brain has to do with so many personal topics like feelings, emotions, anxieties, personality, decision making, people are naturally pretty curious about it. It's a really easy sell. So it's a pretty easy topic to communicate on and get a crowd going, basically. So I think I got lucky in that way.
Awesome. I like when we deal with paleontologists and space people too. It's like the gateway scientists. Like no one says, "Oh, dinosaurs, how boring." It's same with the brain. So
yeah, and you know what? I want to challenge us all too, though. Like there are these topics that are like, maybe really more obvious that they're interesting because they're personal in some way or really cool. But I think any topic in science is interesting, and I think it's really whenever people say, "Oh, well, no one cares about my type of science," it's like, well, we got to make people care, because if there are scientists interested in studying it, there are people who would be interested in knowing why.
Amazing. All right, I'm going to encourage again people to tune in with questions on YouTube. But while we're waiting for some questions specifically on the brain, I had some of my own. So you've talked about the brain and using all this energy and doing all these amazing things. How much energy does the brain use? Like compared to the rest of our body, what does it take to run the brain?
That's a good question. I used to know the exact, I have it here somewhere. Oops, sorry for that mess and noise. I actually have a little pamphlet of fun facts, so let me look it up and let you know, because it's a very fascinating answer. So it's 25% of our daily calories. It's very greedy, and it's about 516 calories a day, which is equivalent to a Big Mac. So yes, I have this poster just laying around my house. So about the same amount of calories in a Big Mac, that's how much the brain uses up every day. And I think a bunch of the body's oxygen too. The brain is super picky about oxygen levels. That's why those games where people like faint as a competition and all that, you don't want to do that. You don't want to do any weird internet challenge where you're limiting oxygen to your brain, because the cells of your brain, they spend all this time developing into their beautiful structures, and they are divas. If they don't get their oxygen, they will die, and that can be very, very dangerous. In fact, things like a stroke are a result of cells in the brain not getting the oxygen they need, and there can be permanent damage. So we have to be really careful to keep our brains healthy with airflow.
Yes, great message. And also, we need to do a follow-up session just with that notebook, because that thing is amazing. What is that? Anyway, we'll discuss that later. Serious stuff now. Okay, so there's so many brain cells. There's trillions of connections. There's billions of cells. How do scientists parse out what these individual cells do in the brain if there are so many? How do we even discover that?
It's one of the biggest mysteries, and that's why I will never say, oh, there's 100 different types of cells in the brain, there's 5, there's 3, because we don't really know. We're still even trying to identify new cell types, and we've been doing this for centuries. Some of the earliest drawings of cells of the brain came a long time ago, and we're still discovering new cell types and subtle differences between cells. It is a very cool question. And so we have some researchers who are trying to take really, really high resolution images of the brain. And then they'll collaborate with like data scientists and computer scientists to try to map out and automate the process of analyzing what are we really looking at? Because really imagine you're just looking at this complicated web. And it does take a lot of computer science and heavy machine power to separate, okay, that belongs to this cell and this cell and this cell. So that's one of the pretty hot areas of research right now. It's called Connectomics. And so if you're interested in computers and you would want to apply that interest to the brain, you have a very healthy future ahead of you. And so you can look up Connectomics or just look up high resolution of brain cells, and you'll find some fascinating images and booming areas of research.
Yeah, so that's one topic within this overarching series of neuroscience, and you're absurdly passionate about all of this. So for people tuning in at home, is there something that really excites you in brain research right now? What is like blowing your mind?
Oh, there's so much. There's a million answers to this. I think some really exciting areas of research are how we finally have the genetic and a genetic technology to start answering questions about like, okay, this cell is required to do this task. And there's some great research happening pretty close by to where I am right now in Toronto, trying to understand which neurons are even involved in, let's say, fear. And now we have this fancy genetics that will let us turn different cells in the brain on and off on command in rodent models, not in us, don't worry. So we can take mice that have special genetic edits, and we can turn on and off different cells in their brains, really specific cells in their brains at specific times to try to see, okay, if they would normally be afraid of this, but I change the way this cell works and turn it off, now they're not afraid. Interesting. Now we understand the circuit behind fear, which is such a, primitive kind of emotion. So to me, being able to do those types of manipulation experiments are fascinating. Ethically, they become very scary because there are some devices, they're kind of special magnets that you can put on the surface of the brain. And people don't have these in their pockets, like, don't worry. They're very expensive and there are very few of those machines. But in theory, these magnets in certain parts of the brain can start to dampen down certain brain activity, and they can change the way someone might respond to something. And it's a very short-term effect. I could just magnet on, turn off this part of your brain, and that'll change something you say, and then magnet away. But it does get kind of scary when you think about long-term impacts of that and possibilities. So brain research is just always a conundrum of fascinating and ethically kind of like, oh God, we got to be careful.
So I know what I'm going to do after this session. That is go look up some of these things that you've talked about. Like, so
Yeah.
you have so much great content of your own, but if for people at home that want to see things in all sorts of different avenues, I guess, where can we send people to learn more about the brain? And I'll link anything you highlight in our YouTube chat bar so people can check that out. But where books or resources that you really recommend?
Yeah, well, the biggest organization for neuroscientists is Society for Neuroscience, and they have some really fun, I'm forgetting the name of it on the spot. They have a really great blog. So the Society for Neuroscience blog is really filled with interesting information, really easy to read. And so that would be, I can send it to you after, Jesse, the name. I'm blanking on it right now. That would be really great. And also look up #neuroscience on social media, and you'll find tons of really amazing neuroscientists like me. Well, I shouldn't call myself a but anyway, tons of amazing neuroscientists who are sharing their favorite facts about the brain and the different things that they're studying about the brain. So I would go and look there as well, just like the everyday sources. Vanessa Hill has a YouTube channel called Braincraft, and she shares fantastic neuroscience and psychology work, and she has an interesting show coming out at some point that will have some amazing things for you to watch too.
Amazing. So yes, I do look forward to that blog. I've been trying to find it myself, but if you could link it to me, great. And I'll share Braincraft and #neuroscience with the YouTube chat bar. For me personally, what got me interested in this is Oliver Sacks' books. So he passed but he's an amazing neuroscience writer on a huge variety of topics. Sam, this has been great. Is there any last message you want to share with us before we go on your work, or again, how people can learn a little bit more about you?
Be nice to your brain and be nice to other people, and we will get through everything together with our extraordinary biology.
Outstanding. Well, there's no better way to end than that. So Sam, thank you so much for joining once again. And for people on YouTube, thanks for tuning in. And do check us out again every 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 Pacific. We'll be doing more amazing people science communicators from around the world. And we really hope you can tune in. For now, have a wonderful rest of your day. And bye for now, Sam.
Take care. Bye. Thanks, everyone.